And that picture appears in every book. Now, mob football has nothing whatsoever to do with Scottish football. It has to do with English football. If they want to claim it, that's fine. As far as I'm concerned, mob football, hundreds of people kicking a ball, which was irrelevant, was a great chance to punch the guy down the street who you didn't like. Okay. The ball was irrelevant. Up in Scotland, in every town and parish, every Sunday minimum, every feast day, Scots were playing a precursor of passing and running. Now you have to think, why would they have done that? Because Scotland is an intelligent European nation that has succeeded on theory coming before practice. Now, that's why I compare it to the Scottish Enlightenment, where you find that the vast majority of doctors trained in Edinburgh. Why? Because there was a scientific tradition. Now, the thing that I've worked out, that's what football had. Football had a scientific tradition which enjoyed the Enlightenment, and culturally, as far as I can see, it was based on the broad idea of the clan system. The individual succeeds with the work, thanks to the work of the clan, and that's football. It doesn't matter if you've got Lionel Messi in your team. If you haven't got 10 other people helping him, he's rubbish. Now, that concept is the one for the rest of my life I will push. It was exactly the opposite of the concept that obtained in England, because England, unfortunately, had its football smothered by the toffs of public schools like Eton and Harrow, who, of course, had an influence which is actually unfounded, but every history will tell you Eton and Harrow was where football was founded. One, it's a flat lie for England, and two, it's absolutely irrelevant for Scotland, because that was nothing to do with the way football developed in the 1840s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s in Scotland.
So it developed in Scotland along, as you say, very different lines. It wasn't kick and rush, and people sort of kicking the ball up in the air and everyone running after it. But rather, it was thoughtful, it was considered, and it was scientific. Does that take us rather neatly to the whole concept of the Scotch professor?
Oh, yes, sirree.
Exported the game.
You look at next week is the 150th anniversary of the world's first international at the West of Scotland Cricket Ground in Partick, and thank God the ground is still there almost in its entirety. I get people to look at that game and get them to understand what was going on, because the England team came up, chosen by Charles Alcock of the London-based Football Association. It really annoys me that it's the Football Association. That's English exceptionalism. No, it was a football association based in London, and its writ barely ran beyond Watford, let alone the Watford Gap. So they come up, and they're almost all of them are used to the game played in England. You get the ball, you dribble. You wait till you are tackled. If the ball breaks away from you, your pal's backing up, try and get it and dribble. Passing is an act of cowardice, okay? Because football is a way of training you for the rigors of being the white man going out to the empire and showing no fear amongst all these brown faces that you're going to be in charge of. Okay, that there are quite a few books which deal with football and empire.
Okay.
Now, Scotland has been playing this game where you pass the ball and move it. Now, the game kicks off about 2:30 on St. Andrew's Day, Now, that's not a coincidence. St. Andrew's Day, 1872. England kick off. Scott gets the ball. Quite normally, English player runs up to boot his man up in the air. Scott kicks the ball away. Now, the English players must have gone, what the hell was that? What did he just do? It's a concept which would have been beyond them. It's like, no, that's wrong. You're supposed to allow me to kick you and maybe I can run with the ball myself. So even though the game ended 0-0, you have the introduction of the Scotch Professor Code. The English go back. They must have said, you're not going to believe this, but the Scots seem to move up and down the pitch and they seem to have planned it. Also, there's a terrible thing the Scots did. They practiced. Now, as we all know, if you're an old Etonian, practicing is tantamount to cheating because you're giving yourself an advantage over the next man. I mean, it's insane. You are a cheat. But unfortunately, English football was infected by this, I'm going to show you I don't care. So the upper class teams would amble onto the pitch with their hands in their pockets because really, I don't really care about this. Now, the intelligent Scotsmen and women, it's like, no, we're playing a game here. We will practice. We will decide who plays where. We will theorize. Now, I've just explained to you world football. Now, you wouldn't know it if you actually read a book because it will say, and of course, the English FA was founded and basically football started. Gosh, wasn't that wonderful? Well, every one of the 135,000 words I've written so far absolutely crushes that nonsense into the ground.
Excellent. We're looking forward to seeing it. Let me remind everyone what the book is called, and we may be able to put it on a strip at the foot of the screen if we can. But it's called "The Scottish Game: How Scotland Invented Modern World Football." And when it's published, it'll be published. You'll see the author is Ged O'Brien. Look out for it. Because it promises to be explosive. Because the version,
it is difficult, John, because I'm basically saying everything you think you know about football in England is completely and utterly wrong. And I've discovered in the last 30 years, people react to that as if I just said your mum is ugly. And it's really curious. And it's like, no, this is nothing to do with me. If I got run over by a tram tomorrow, these facts would still exist. Please Ged, consider them.
Maybe the way to look at this is to consider yourself like Galileo. Because remember, before he came along, the general view was that the Earth was the center of everything.
Yeah.
And the moon and the stars and the sun revolved around the Earth. And he said, well, actually, it's not like that because I did a few observations and I made a few measurements. And I can tell you that it doesn't, we orbit around the sun. And for that, he was pilloried and he was threatened with torture and he recanted. But now we all know that he was telling it like it is. So it's not unusual what's often seen as heresy at the very beginning, I always said at the kickoff, once the examination of the facts begins, there's a tendency for the facts to lead you to the conclusion, though it may be different to what everyone else believes. In fact, there's like the classic situation here perhaps is this, is that I think the Soviets took the view that the truth is what the majority believe.
Yes.
And essentially that's the way things tend to be, but it's not true, of course. There are facts, and you'll be talking about the facts, which is going to be fascinating. You didn't quite tell us about the Scotch professors, though.
Now then, Scotch professor. It's really funny because it becomes very quickly apparent to the northwest of England that the Scots are playing a game which is in concept and development and skill light years beyond anything that the industrial towns of the northwest of England have, particularly Lancashire. So from the 1870s onward, with the development of clubs like Preston North End, Burnley, Bolton, Great Lever, Turton, you find them bringing Scots down to teach the English players how to play this strange passing and running game, because, of course, football has always been massively popular. Football has always been a part of working class experience, and Lancashire was far enough away that the writ of London did not run. So you get teams like Darwen and Blackburn Rovers taking on players like Fergie Souter and Jimmy Love. Now, the dogs in the street knew they were being paid. And so you have these Scotch professors, which is somebody who can explain this extraordinarily strange thing that you pass the ball from one guy to another.
Yeah.
So every club that wanted to be good started importing Scots players. Now, there's a great deal of bigotry. I was looking at that book, Association Football and the Men Who Made It, by Gibson and Pickford. They do discuss 115 years ago, they do discuss the Scotch professor, and the chapter is entitled The Insidious Advent of the Scotch Professor. So I don't think you need to guess as to what their attitude was. Now, why is that a problem? Because the Scotch professor was working class and professional.
Yeah.
And this went against the amateur upper class ethos that unfortunately polluted the southeast of England, which, like now, it was the top dog. So you have all these teams playing with players that were Scotch professors. In fact, in 1883, Burnley had 9 Scotch professors in their team. Preston North End had 10. Burnley, the previous year, had none. And a committee man admitted to a newspaper, well, we didn't have any Scotch professors and nobody came to see us, because the Scotch professor was the only game in town. So the Scotch professor spread, which gave us the law of unintended consequences. It was quite clear everyone was being paid, and the posh London folk in the FA decided they had to do something. So you get people getting dobbed in. Oh, Preston North End have played professional. Upton Park of London complained. So Preston North End were thrown out of the English FA, as were other clubs. But of course, what happened was Mr. Sudell of Preston North End, it was brilliant. He blinked last. He went to the FA and said, yeah, actually, yeah, my players are Scotch professors and they're paid. Oh, by the way, in my pocket, I have 34 other clubs and we're just about to found a British Football Association. So if you want my players to be amateur, they'll be amateur and you can't say anything about it. There's one guy who I call the liar extraordinaire, Charles Alcock, very, very intelligent political man. And he realized we're going to have to do something about the Scotch professor, because if we insist on amateurism, we're going to lose every single major club and we'll just be left with the old boys, former player clubs in London and the home counties, and our football will die. So the Scotch professor perfected the game, went to England, and brought in professionalism, because you couldn't afford to work, get injured, and then find you couldn't work. So it was like, pay me. So it is impossible, particularly in the north of England, to look at anything which didn't basically have the complete Scottish culture. So all these teams I'm talking about, culturally, they were Scottish teams who accidentally happened to play in Lancashire, but in every other respect, they were Scottish. Now, that's the concept. Normally, when countries become famous, they're famous because they invaded somebody, killed a load of people, and stole all their goods and any wealth they had. Okay. Yeah. British Empire, cough, British Empire. So what you have here, and it's why I absolutely love the work I'm doing and will do it till the day I die. The most important social phenomenon in the world is association football. The Scots took it to every major country on earth. It was an intellectual idea, and they won the intellectual idea and gave football to every major country on earth. The idea. Scotland will live forever through every other country on earth.
Interesting. One of the questions we've had tonight is this: has football replaced religion as the opium of the people?
It always has replaced religion. Okay. And so here's our next wee link. So what is it? 1580, Scotland goes from being Catholic to being Protestant, and not the pragmatic Protestantism of England, where Henry VIII is like, sorry, guys, I need to marry another wife because I'm running short of chances of having an heir, right? In Scotland, no, there were serious doctrinal differences. So you get the Reformation comes along and starts destroying any non-biblical element of religion. So Christmas goes, because that's not in the Bible. Understandable. Now, football is suspiciously papist because it's a way of people enjoying themselves. Okay. Now, see, if you're not praying and marching towards God, you're marching towards the devil. So, see, the best thing that we've got to prove that Scotland invented football is the Kirk records. Record after record where somebody gets fined for playing football in the churchyard instead of going into church. They promise never to do it again, them and their pals, everywhere. You get in the 1750s, you get the statistical accounts of Scotland, and it's really funny. All these reverends writing their accounts, and all of them, yes, football used to be played in this area, but not anymore. It's only played by boys. And you're thinking, oh, dearie me, you are talking utter nonsense. So this strange papist thing is actually the last example of the old religion. And of course, why is religion and football intertwined? You need at least 20 people to play football. Okay. Where are you going to find them? At church on Sunday. Well, outside the church because you don't go in. Okay, so down in the south of Scotland, you have Rutherford's Witnesses. Okay, and it's a wee spot outside an old church. And Rutherford was the divine who was getting sick of the fact that everybody streamed past his church to play football where these ancient stones were. So he came out one day to say, as the stones are my witness, you're all going to hell. And obviously everyone went, "Aye, very good, Reverend. Thanks, we're in the middle of a game." But thank God it's an example from the 1620s of football being regularly played everywhere. And you can go absolutely to any Kirk record and people are enjoying themselves. They're drinking, they're fighting, and they're playing football, regular football, not this mob football rubbish. So God bless religion.
That's just so interesting. It really is. Now, these Scotch professors, as I understand it, thinking back to our last conversation, didn't only go to England, they went much further afield. How far afield did they go?
I remember in the 1870s, the Scottish Cup, obviously you have to be in the SFA, and Scotland came very close in the late 1870s to drawing a member of the SFA, the Shanghai Engineering Football Club. Fortunately, they didn't take up their option because that would have been some away trip, Hibernian away to the Shanghai Engineering Company, which brings us to how did these Scotch professors get around the place? Scottish commerce. So everywhere that Scots went, their engineers, their doctors, they take football with them. And here's the other thing. It's a general rule. It's not specific. Everywhere the Scots went, it was like, come in. Hey, look what we're doing. Play this game that we've got. So, you have people like John Harley, born in Cathcart Parish, draftsman on the railways in Springburn. So he gets sent out to the Ferrocarril Westy, the Western Railway Company of Buenos Aires. So it's 1908, and he's playing against the Central Uruguay Railway Cricket Club of Montevideo, Uruguay, because they're pals. They swap, they play games. The Uruguayans have picked up the English thud and blunder, kick the ball, run after it, thud, kick, push. They know they don't like this game, but they like football. So they're asking a question and they don't know the answer. Now, Ferrocarril Westy lose 4-1. So they're thumped. But Jose Piendameni of the Central Uruguay Railway Cricket Club sees this guy from Cathcart spraying the ball around, fast passing, moving it. And it's his road to Damascus. It's like, oh my God, this guy, Juan Harley, this is it. This is the answer. They bring him back to Montevideo. Obviously, hey, have a job in the CURCC. And he works in the workshops at Peñarol, which is what the club becomes. Now, he trains basically the whole of Uruguay, particularly Peñarol and the Uruguayan team. He trains them to play the Scotch professor passing and running game. Uruguay put on the world's first World Cup in 1930. Oh, look, we're back at Qatar. They're basically 11 Scotch professors in the final playing against another 11 Scotch professors from Argentina. This is the sad thing. In his old age, he's taken out in front of a game Rampla Juniors are playing, and he is officially, in his old age, named El Reformador, the reformer of Uruguayan football. He's buried in a cemetery in Montevideo. There should be a statue in either Cathcart or Springburn, 20 meters high to the man, and almost no one's ever heard of him. So this is unfortunately where we turn serious, because we, unfortunately, most people have no idea that Scotland and England are different. In fact, most people have no idea there's a place called Scotland or a thing called Scotland. And I don't know how to break that, John.
Well, your book's going to help. Just to recap, the final you referred to, was that the final of the World Cup?
That was the World Cup. You
And
had
when was that? 1930.
1930 at the Centenario Stadium
in Montevideo.
In Montevideo, you basically have a team of Uruguayans who are then the Olympic champions as well, playing the Scotch professor, fast passing, moving game, which was given to them by John Harley from Cathcart.
Extraordinary. Who did they play in the final?
They played Argentina. Let's jump across the Rio de la Plata, because James Brown in 1824 leaves on the SS Symmetry to go from Leith to set up a farming colony outside of Buenos Aires. Doesn't work, but he and his children and his many grandchildren, the Browns, move into Buenos Aires. At the same time, Alexander Watson Hutton, degree from Edinburgh University, TB in the family, is told you need to move, Alex, because TB is going to get you. So he goes over to the Scotch Presbyterian School in Buenos Aires with his newfangled intelligent ideas on teaching. People don't realize that. He was one of the people leading the educational development. How do you teach children? He sets up a football team because, you know, he's from the Gorbals. Of course, he's going to set up a football team. They don't like the fact that he wants to make PE and sport a major part of it. The books say his kids were breaking the windows. He leaves and sets up, can't call it Scotch, sets up the Buenos Aires English High School. His team of players become the alumni, right? The ex-players. They become the first great Argentine league team. Oh, by the way, Alec Lamont, another teacher, sets up the first league outside of Britain, and the first one, 1891, is duked out between St Andrews and the Old Caledonians, who were a bunch of Scottish sewage workers building the
let me get this right, because this is so good. I mean, honestly, was it the first final? Did you say the first final in Argentina?
The first league, is played between St Andrews, who win it, and the Old Caledonians, who come second. I have no idea where they got those names from. I'll do some extra
research. Who could even begin to guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'll give you. Since we last spoke, it's really funny because the more you know, the less you know. So I'm aware that Brazil, the football, was invented by Scots. It's always Charles Miller, which is rubbish. And I'm on YouTube watching some Portuguese telly, as you do. I don't speak Portuguese. And I'm watching a local television station in Rio, and they're talking you're getting the automatic translation. They're talking about how the Bangor Football Club are just about to unveil a statue of Thomas Donohoe from Busby. And it's like, excuse me? Thomas Donohoe from the Busby outside Glasgow. And yeah, so Thomas Donohoe is a master dyer working in the old print works in Busby.
Right.
He goes out to the Fabrica Bangor, which is a multi-ethnic part of Rio. What's he going to do, John? He sets up a football team before Charles Miller in Sao Paulo. It gets better. He co-founds Bangor Football Club, which has the first black professional footballer in Brazil, because there was a massive color bar. In fact, the other Rio teams, once Bangor start playing, and they've got Francisco Carregal from the Fabrica Bangor, they refuse to play because there's a black. And so Bangor go, great, we're leaving. We're not playing basically against a bunch of racists. There's your Scotch professor right there, right now. That's the thing I'm so proud of that the Scots have done. Everywhere they went, they basically said, come in. You're all part of us. I look at the civic nationalism that's being pushed in Scotland now, which is an ideal. Your DNA, your ethnicity is irrelevant. Do you want to be Scots? No? You really do. So in Cathcart Cemetery, and I've added something else. I don't have time to do it, but there's lots of people, Alistair Firth particularly, who has been working on saving the graves of Scotch professors. You have Hugh McColl, who died in Glasgow in 1915. He founds Sevilla Football Club on Burns Night. Okay, it's not the oldest club, because the Rio Tinto company buys the mines in Huelva near Cadiz.
I'm passing through Huelva tomorrow.
But I mean, you're kidding me. You're kidding me.
I'm passing.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And the route to Portugal takes me across the Rio Tinto.
Oh, see if you've got any time. Please take a few photos, because the point.
The Rio Tinto is tiny. I mean,
but what you have, it's really interesting, because you can't take these things, you can't separate these things. So Hugh Matheson of the Rio Tinto company, by the way, he's a Matheson of Jardine Matheson, the people that basically founded the world's first international drug trade, right? Yeah. He won't have anything to do with that. He goes out to run and control Rio Tinto, right? People like Charles Adam from Paisley found Recreativo Huelva, which is the first club in Spain. It's known as the Dean. What do? They get in Spaniards immediately. Now, the Recreativo Huelva website is very good. It's one of the few websites that understands there's an English culture and a Scottish culture, because the English workers that go over, they build themselves a scheme, they put a wall around it so Spaniards can't get in, and it looks like the home counties. Now, you know this area. It's basically slightly south of the most northerly part of Africa, and you look like you're in Surrey. Whereas the Scots, right, come along and play. So you have Recreativo Huelva, you have Sevilla, you even have Jose Ramos Oliva, who his family found Real Betis of Seville, playing green and white stripes. Yeah. How can that be? Why? Because he's sent over to Dumfries, to the Marist College in Dumfries. He gets into football. He's going up to Glasgow to see Celtic play, because, of course, Brother Wilfred was in Dumfries occasionally. Celtic are playing in green and white stripes. The Andalusian colours are green and white. Well, yeah. Oh, look at it. Real Betis still playing green and white stripes. The influence is everywhere. Barcelona, the city. 1899, the St. Andrews factory, lots of Scots set up the Club Escocés, the Scottish club. They only last a year. They actually fold because the young Barcelona, refuse to play against them, but they steal 3 of their players. So Barcelona is founded with Scotch professors. So in Cathcart Cemetery is a memorial to the Patullo family. George Patullo is the first great striker who plays for Barcelona. his records aren't really beaten until Lionel Messi. Almost no one's ever heard. He needs a 25-meter statue. Everywhere you go, you will find Scots. The difficulty is, and a good friend, Ian Campbell-Whittle, who speaks both Portuguese and Spanish, has been to Bangor to say, in your little museum, can you actually differentiate between English and Scots? But for them, it's like, it's all the same. What does it matter?
Yeah.
That, unfortunately, that's the reason why I'm doing my book. My book is not going to succeed. It will be published. It will be a success probably 50 years after I'm dead and gone. So I don't kid myself, John, and we were discussing this. Yes, I'm honest. I don't expect everybody to go, Ged, oh my God, this is right. No. People will react badly, and I can't wait for next week, the 150th anniversary. I'm taking my seniors to the West of Scotland cricket ground, and I will be interested to see what the media say about that, what the media in England say about that match. And I bet you they won't mention Robert Gardner or anything he did.
Yeah. Well, that will be fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I'm just going to remind everyone two things. First of all, your book hasn't been published yet.
No.
But when it is published, it will be called The Scottish Game, How Scotland Invented Modern World Football. Now, if that's not an inducement to buy the book, I can't think of anything else that might be. I mean, what Ged is describing tonight is something which is iconoclastic. He has taken the shibboleths around the origins of football worldwide and completely and utterly smashed them up. And behind all of that, you get the real facts, the truth about the Scotch professors, the truth about these extraordinary characters who traveled to China, to Uruguay, to Brazil, to Argentina. And I suspect if we had time, Ged, you could tell us about other places that they traveled to.
Oh, yeah.
And what they gave people there was what they were desperate to have, which is a way of playing the beautiful game that was beautiful. And you can understand why it became popular, because who the heck in their right mind wants to see 20-odd people rushing about like headless chickens? The great, seems to me anyway, a notable factor about football is the passing. It's the skill. It's the ability for someone to see a ball traveling round about 20, 30 meters from a great height and trap it on their instep. If you don't find that impressive, go find something else in life, because and I think that extraordinary impact that football has across the world it is a testimony to all of these interesting Scots who went to all these different parts of the world. We don't have a lot of time left, but is there any place that they went to, Ged, that you feel is impactful and we haven't touched upon it until now?
When you say place, I mean,
yeah. Well, we talked about Brazil. We talked about going to China. We talked about Uruguay. We talked about Argentina.
All right. Let us talk about the Austro-Hungarian Empire briefly. John Madden is mostly known by Celtic fans as the first centre forward in the first ever Celtic team. Yeah, great. God bless him. Actually, his importance is he retires. He is persuaded to move to Prague to train the Slavia Prague team. He's a Scotch professor. He has discipline. He has understanding. He and other people like John Tate Robertson from Rangers take the idea of the Scotch professor, and it's taken on by the Central Europeans, particularly the Austrians. The Wunder team of Meisel is basically a bunch of Austrians who were Scotch professors, and that's the beauty. It's like DNA. It's a meme. That cultural DNA of Scotland gets passed to other cultures who take it on. But still, every match you will ever see anywhere in the world, you are basically watching the voices and the ghosts of Scots of 500 years ago who will be looking down and going, that's our game.
I mean, it's just so fascinating. I mean, Graham Duthie has just said, he finds it fascinating too. And it's, I mean, I do hope that the folks who are in the audience tonight watching and listening will tell other people to go to the YouTube and watch this show, because it is mind-blowingly different to the versions of football that you perhaps have absorbed in the past. It's just so very, very different. I mean, think about this, ladies and gentlemen, that if you're talking about the origins of Penarol, if you're talking about the origins of football in Brazil, if you're talking about the first clubs in Argentina, if you're talking about the first club in Spain, Huelva, if you're talking about Real Betis, who play in Celtic's colours. I mean, this is extraordinary. And the top scorer for Barcelona until Lionel Messi came along was also Scottish. I mean, I suspect, Ged, in the time available to us tonight, you've only scratched the surface.
Here's something that they can do, John. I love it. Go on the Independiente Football Club website of Buenos Aires, founded in 1905. They were called Independent. It's nice for tonight because they all worked for a shoe shop, and Maipú was the shoe shop team, and the young pups weren't allowed to play, so they set up Independiente. Go look at their third strip, because in 1905, their strip was based on the St. Andrew's Club, blue and white. Their third strip that they occasionally use now is blue with a saltire.
Extraordinary.
Right? Beautiful. A massive team, Independiente are, and they haven't forgotten their roots, that they were founded and they honoured the Scots who were in the first team to win the first league in 1891.
I mean, this occurs to me, and I suspect I know the answer. I hope I've got it wrong. What interest has the SFA shown in your work?
Not ever heard from them. Actually, I did suggest, you know how like the 150th anniversary, there's going to be in September next year a game against England. That is so dull. Yeah. I've actually suggested on social media, why don't you organise games, use under 21s, use the women's team, and play against countries who basically are the children of the Scotch professor.
Fantastic idea.
Hungary, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, France. Just play and be able to develop and say, guys, we are the ones that handed you over football, and you then ran with it yourselves. Because that's the beautiful thing. The fact that Scots basically went, here it is, now go and do with it what you want. But the core DNA of every footballer on earth is Scottish DNA, probably from the Highlands and from the great clans of Scotland.
Isn't that fascinating? And the one thing we didn't talk about tonight, because we addressed it last time, but it's worth mentioning before we close, the first black captain of a national team.
Andrew Watson changed my life. And it's really funny because I've become friends with his descendant, Malik al-Nazir, who said his mum ran in one night 20 years ago to say, you're on telly. and he was watching a BBC Scotland documentary about Andrew Watson, who I had just discovered. And it's like, my God, that's me. And it started him on his travels. And so the both of us say Andrew Watson changed our lives. The most influential black footballer of all time. Nobody comes close, because he took the Scotch Professor game to the posh people of the southeast of England. That will be for another time, maybe, John.
Yeah.
But
boy.
you cannot understate his importance, and we will appreciate him as the decades go by. He's actually the first Scotch professor. People are now starting to go, wow, he was some guy.
So here's a black guy who became the Scottish captain.
Yep.
And when was that?
In the late 1870s, early 1880s. He played in the game that broke English hearts. 1882, Scotland 5, England 1. The mural I helped with is on the back of Hampden Bowling Club, facing the railway line. That was the game which broke England. They realised, we are destroyed. They set up a team called Corinthians, and he played for them. Watson played for them. A black Scot played for the all-white English guys, teaching them how to play the passing and running game.
Oh, fantastic. Way to go. You know something? I doubt if there's, apart from your students and maybe a handful of others, nobody really knows much about him. And nobody really knows anything about much of what you've been discussing tonight, which is just absolutely fascinating. I mean, it so much deserves a bigger audience. But you know something? I think it's going to get that bigger audience. I sincerely do, because I think the World Cup itself needs some form of discovering its moral and ethical base again.
Yes.
Because I can't believe that I hesitate to use the words here, but the rather dubious nature of FIFA cannot continue for very much longer. There'll have to be a reimagining of its ethical base, and I suspect when that happens, or maybe what will precipitate it, is information like this, where people went out without prejudice to say to people who were interested, come along, we don't care what color you are, what size you are, what shape you are, what nationality you are. We just like to share our joy of this particular game. And I think that's really what drives. I mean, okay, FIFA are living off that emotion, but I suspect, I hope rather, that we'll have perhaps a refashioning of that, and maybe along the way, it'd be something that maybe the SFA could get involved in, but it doesn't have to be them, frankly. I think the merits of what you've been discussing tonight, and I would like to impress upon everyone, we have only scratched the surface, folks. I mean, you really ought to get in touch with Ged. You ought to give him any support that you can, because he is changing the world. And you may be sitting there thinking, oh, the world is a dreadful place, the Supreme Court, this, the fact of the matter is that you can only change yourself. And by changing yourself, you change the world. And here's an opportunity to pick up on something that somebody else has done. Ged has done the heavy lifting. What you can all do out there is to participate in his future work. And I'm sure, Ged, you would welcome the help you can get in moving this forward, getting the book published, and all the rest of that good stuff.
Well, like Isaac Newton, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm taking work which people like Andy Mitchell have spent decades collecting information and repurposing it. I am aware that the more I know, the less I know. Join me on Twitter, and follow me, and most importantly, spread the word. I noticed somebody's just put up that FIFA was founded with money from the SFA. Yes, it was, because 1947 they played a game at Hampden. Great Britain versus the rest of the world. All the money went to the bankrupt FIFA, and that's how the four nations joined as separate nations. Actually have just met a 90-year-old woman who was at that game when she was 15. That's what keeps me going.
Well, all strength to your arm, Ged. I have to say this has been absolutely fascinating. So many people are saying it's been amazing, Charles Smith. Others saying I've got to go now, but it's been thanks, Ged. Really interesting. I mean, you made a huge impact. There's Ged's details on the screen now, and you can reach him on Twitter and social media and elsewhere. I would encourage everybody who's watching and listening to get in touch, to offer support to Ged. If you're a publisher, or you know publishers, or you know people in the SFA, all of these folks really ought to be, if they get any sense, they should be jumping at the chance to get Ged involved in what they're planning. I won't say any more about that because I feel I'm being more than effusive here, but I very much appreciate your time tonight, Ged. It's been absolutely riveting, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I evidently have.
It's a story of heroes, and I'm lucky enough to be the one that can stand up on his mound and shout it. I mean, I'm truly blessed because I don't think I've been so proud of all these people who actually gave us the game, which we absolutely love. And every human being on earth can thank a wee country in Northern Europe for producing something which gives people more pleasure than anything else on earth, well, with your clothes on.
Yeah, there you are. I couldn't have put it more eloquently myself. In fact, I would have failed to do so. Thanks again, Ged. It's been phenomenally interesting. I do hope people will go away from the show tonight thinking, hey, I'm going to do something here. Because forget all the news from elsewhere about Supreme Courts. This is really fascinating. You can change the world by getting involved in this. Let me just remind you of who's on next week. We have, as you can see on screen, Professor Shona Douglas-Scott. She's the chair in law at Queen Mary University of London, and she'll be here next Wednesday at 7 o'clock, November 30th, and she wants to talk about the Supreme Court. So connect with Ged, please, and help move this process along. Ged, a big thank you to you.
Thank you, John.
It's very much appreciated. And more strength to your arm. Take care. Good night all, and see you next week at 7 o'clock. Good night.